His ex-wife mocked him with $2. Then his dying war dog uncovered a buried secret powerful men would kill for. Divorced after 44 years, with $2, a seal bought a dead farm. His dog found what they hid inside. Snow buried the Bitterroot Mountains the night former Navy SEAL Wade Holloway drove toward the abandoned farm nobody wanted. Beside him sat Ghost, an aging military K-9 who hadn't stopped staring at the old $2 bill since the courthouse humiliation. But beneath the dead barn and frozen earth, something had been waiting for Wade his entire life. Comment 1 or 0 and tell us where you're watching from. The most humiliating moment of Wade Holloway's life was not getting shot in Fallujah. It was the sound of laughter inside a Montana courthouse. Not loud laughter, the quiet kind. The kind people try to hide because they know they should be ashamed of it. But they laugh anyway. The courtroom in Alder Ridge smelled faintly of old paper, wet wool coats, and burnt coffee drifting from the clerk's desk in the hallway. Outside, snow fell slowly over western Montana, coating the streets and parked trucks in a dull gray blanket that matched the sky. Inside courtroom number 3, Wade Holloway sat perfectly still beside his dog. At 72 years old, Wade looked like a man carved from old timber and war. His shoulders were still broad beneath his faded denim jacket, but age had bent him slightly forward, as though years of carrying invisible weight had slowly pushed him toward the earth. Deep scars crossed the backs of his hands. His silver hair was cropped short, military style, out of habit more than vanity. Beside him lay Ghost. The German shepherd rested on the cold courthouse floor with military discipline, his body still despite the arthritis stiffening his hips. His muzzle had turned mostly white over the years, and one torn ear leaned crooked from an explosion outside Kandahar 12 years earlier. Ghost's cloudy amber eyes never left the people across the room. Wade wished his own eyes could do the same. But every time he looked at Sharon, something inside him twisted. 44 years. 44 years of marriage reduced to this room, to this silence, to this ending. Sharon Holloway sat at the opposite table in an expensive cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Wade's pickup truck. Her blonde hair was carefully styled, untouched by the weather outside. Beside her sat Randall Pierce, the best divorce attorney in Ravalli County, a man with silver cufflinks and the cold smile of someone who billed by the hour and enjoyed every minute of it. And next to Sharon sat Denton Pike. The entire town knew Denton Pike, land developer, money man, builder of luxury cabins for rich out-of-state buyers who wanted authentic Montana wilderness without authentic Montana hardship. Denton was 20 years younger than Wade, with perfect teeth and a heavy gold watch that flashed every time he adjusted his sleeve. He leaned comfortably back in his chair like he already owned the room. Maybe he did. Judge Miriam Caldwell adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at the paperwork spread across her desk. "Mr. Holloway," she said carefully, "before we finalize today's proceedings, I want to confirm one final time that you understand the terms of this settlement." Wade nodded once. His voice came rough and low. "I understand." The judge hesitated. There was pity in her eyes. Wade hated pity almost as much as he hated Sharon's expressionless face. "This settlement transfers all liquid assets, investment accounts, and jointly owned properties to Mrs. Holloway. Mr. Holloway retains ownership of the inherited Holloway Farm property located outside Alder Ridge." At the mention of the farm, Denton Pike smiled slightly. Ghost's ears twitched. Wade noticed it immediately. The dog had spent years detecting danger before human beings ever sensed it. Roadside bombs, ambushes, men hiding in shadows. Ghost trusted instincts more than appearances, and right now, the dog did not like something in this room. Randall Pierce stood smoothly. "Your Honor," he said, "my client believes this arrangement is more than fair considering Mr. Holloway's limited financial contribution to the marriage after his military retirement." Wade's jaw tightened. Limited contribution. Funny phrase. 44 years ago, Wade had returned from Vietnam with a Purple Heart, damaged hearing, and nightmares that never fully stopped. He had worked construction, security, long-haul trucking, anything that kept food on the table while Sharon raised their daughter and built the life they once promised each other. Then Afghanistan happened. Private contractors needed experienced operators after 9/11. Wade went back overseas at 50 years old because the war felt simpler than civilian life ever had. He came home different, quieter, harder, and somewhere over the years, Sharon stopped waiting for him to come back emotionally. Maybe she had every right, maybe not. But hearing a lawyer reduce an entire lifetime to limited contribution felt like someone scraping a knife slowly against bone. Pierce continued calmly. Mrs. Holloway also wishes to conclude these proceedings with a symbolic gesture. The courtroom grew still. Denton Pike folded his hands together with obvious anticipation. Sharon reached into her purse. Wade felt Ghost's body tense beside his boots. Then Sharon placed something on the polished table. A $2 bill. Old, wrinkled, faded from decades of handling. Wade stared at it without understanding at first. Then Sharon finally looked directly at him. Her eyes were cold enough to freeze water. "You remember this, Wade?" He said nothing. Because of course he remembered. Jesus Christ. Of course he remembered. 44 years earlier, his father, Harold Holloway, had handed him that exact $2 bill outside the church after the wedding rehearsal dinner. Harold had been wearing old work boots and a brown canvas jacket stained with engine grease. He had slipped the bill into Wade's palm with rough hands and said quietly, "A man doesn't need much if he protects what matters." Wade had laughed back then. Young, strong, too young to understand what his father had really meant. Now Sharon pushed the bill slowly across the table toward him. "That," she said, "is all your father ever gave us." A few people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably, but Denton Pike chuckled softly, and someone else laughed too. Wade turned slightly. His former brother-in-law, Carl Benton, sat near the back row grinning openly. Ghost lifted his head. Low thunder rolled inside the dog's chest. Not loud, not yet. Sharon leaned back in her chair. "You spent your whole life chasing wars and ghosts, Wade," she said. "You never built anything after the military, never invested, never planned ahead. All you left behind was broken fences and old stories." Each word landed like a hammer strike. Wade felt heat rising beneath his skin. Not rage, something worse. Shame. The kind of shame only comes when someone weaponizes your failures in front of strangers. Judge Caldwell frowned sharply. "Mrs. Holloway," but Sharon continued anyway. "The farm's worthless. Everybody knows it. The fields died years ago. Your father died, broke up there alone." Her voice sharpened. "Honestly, Wade, this $2 is probably worth more than that land." Denton Pike smirked openly now, and Ghost growled. The sound froze the room. Every head turned toward the dog. Ghost was no longer lying down. The old shepherd stood rigid beside Wade's chair, fur raised along his spine, cloudy eyes locked directly onto the $2 bill. Not Sharon, not Denton. The bill. A deep growl vibrated through the courtroom floor. Wade stared down at him in confusion. "Ghost," he whispered. The dog ignored him. Judge Caldwell leaned forward carefully. "Mr. Holloway, control your animal." Ghost took one slow step toward the table, growling harder now. Wade grabbed the dog gently by the collar. "Easy, easy, boy." But Ghost would not stop staring at the bill. And for the first time all morning, Wade noticed something strange. Tiny faded pencil markings along the edge of the paper. Almost invisible, like numbers. Then Denton Pike suddenly shifted in his seat. Nervous. Just for a second. It happened fast. Most people would have missed it. But Wade spent most of his life reading men under pressure. And Denton Pike had just reacted to that bill. Why? Before Wade could think further, Sharon stood. "I think we're finished here." Judge Caldwell sighed heavily. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose we are." The sound of papers shuffling filled the room. People stood. Coats rustled. The hearing was over. 44 years reduced to signatures and silence. Wade picked up the $2 bill slowly. The paper felt strangely stiff in his fingers. Ghost immediately stopped growling. But the dog kept staring at it, watching it, tracking it with unnatural focus. Wade folded the bill carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. Ghost's eyes followed every movement. Then Wade stood. His knees hurt. Everything hurt. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the courtroom doors while people deliberately avoided looking at him. Except Denton Pike. The developer watched Wade leave with an expression Wade couldn't quite understand. Not triumph. Something else. Something tighter. Like concern. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted through the pale afternoon light. Wade paused on the stone steps while Ghost sat beside him. The cold air burned his lungs. Below them, Alder Ridge stretched quiet beneath winter clouds. Pickup trucks moved slowly along Main Street. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued exactly the same while Wade Holloway's entire world had just collapsed. Ghost suddenly nudged Wade's coat pocket with his nose. Once. Then again. The bill. Wade pulled it halfway out and looked down at the faded paper. Ghost whined softly. Not fear. Urgency. Wade frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog stared toward the mountains rising white and enormous beyond town, toward the direction of the old Holloway farm. Wind moved through the pine trees above the courthouse, and for one brief moment, Wade felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not hope. Not yet. But something close enough to make his chest ache. Then Ghost turned toward the mountains again and growled low beneath his breath. As if somewhere far beyond the snow-covered ridges, something was waiting for them. Wade Holloway stood motionless on the courthouse steps while wind swept powdered snow across Main Street like drifting ash. The mountains beyond Alder Ridge rose dark and endless beneath the winter clouds, their peaks swallowed by fog and stormlight. Ghost sat beside him, staring toward those mountains with complete focus. Not moving. Not blinking. Waiting. Wade slowly pulled the old $2 bill from his coat pocket again. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, though whether from cold or age he couldn't tell anymore. He studied the faded edges beneath the gray afternoon light. Tiny pencil marks. Numbers, maybe. Or scratches. Hard to tell. His father's face rose suddenly in his memory. Harold Holloway standing beside an old diesel tractor sometime around 1978, wiping grease from his hands with a rag while snow blew across the fields behind him. "A man pays attention to small things," Harold had once told him, "because small things usually become big things later." Back then, Wade had been too young to listen carefully. Now his father was dead. Sharon was gone, and the dog was growling at a piece of paper. Wade folded the bill again. "Come on, boy." Ghost finally stood, though reluctantly, still glancing toward the mountains. Wade walked down the courthouse steps slowly, his knees stiff from old injuries and colder weather. Every joint in his body carried memories now. Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam before that. Names and places and faces he spent years trying unsuccessfully to forget. His old Ford pickup sat alone near the end of the parking lot. Rust spread along the wheel wells. One headlight was held in place with duct tape. Snow covered the windshield in a thin crust. Ghost jumped carefully into the passenger seat. Not as fast as he used to. That hurt Wade more than he expected. The engine coughed twice before finally turning over. As the heater rattled weakly to life, Wade looked once toward the courthouse windows. He could still see movement inside. Sharon. Denton Pike. Lawyers gathering papers. People continuing their lives. 44 years ending like a business meeting. He put the truck in gear and drove. The road south out of Alder Ridge cut through frozen valleys and pine-covered hills beneath the darkening sky. Snow thickened as the truck climbed higher into the Bitterroot Mountains. Ghost remained unusually alert. Normally, after stressful situations, the old shepherd slept. Not today. Today, the dog sat upright the entire drive, watching the road ahead with military concentration. "You gonna tell me what's got into you?" Wade muttered. Ghost's ears twitched. No answer, only snow and silence. The farther they climbed into the mountains, the emptier the world became. Small ranches disappeared. Then fences disappeared. Then even power lines vanished into wilderness. By late afternoon, the truck turned onto a narrow gravel road, barely visible beneath fresh snow. Tall pine trees crowded close on both sides like dark walls. Wade hadn't driven this road in almost 15 years. Not since Harold's funeral. And even then, he hadn't stayed long. The truth was, Wade had avoided this place most of his adult life, because the farm reminded him too much of the man he disappointed. His father had been quiet, not weak, never weak, but impossible to understand. Harold Holloway rarely spoke about Vietnam, though Wade later learned his father had worked military communications in places most records still refused to acknowledge existed. Harold returned from war and disappeared into the mountains instead of joining the modern world. He built fences, fixed engines, worked fields nobody believed could survive Montana winters. People in town called him strange, a mountain ghost, a stubborn old mechanic who wasted his life on dead land. Maybe Wade believed some of that himself once. The truck rounded a final curve, and there it was, the Holloway farm. Even buried beneath snow, the place looked wounded. The farmhouse leaned slightly left with age, its white paint peeling in long strips beneath broken gutters. One porch railing had collapsed entirely. Barn roofs sagged beneath heavy snow. Fence posts stuck from the frozen ground like broken teeth. Dead fields stretched toward the mountain ridges beyond. Wade shut off the engine. Silence settled instantly. Deep mountain silence. The kind that makes a man aware of his own breathing. Ghost jumped down first. The shepherd stood perfectly still beside the truck, staring across the property. Then he growled softly. Wade followed the dog's gaze toward the old barn behind the farmhouse. Its massive doors hung crooked. One upper window was shattered black. Snow drifted through the opening. Something about the building felt wrong immediately. Not abandoned exactly. Watching. "You're imagining things," Wade muttered, mostly to himself. But Ghost did not move. The dog's ears flattened slightly. Combat alert. Wade knew the posture well. He'd seen it outside villages before ambushes. Seen it before explosions. Seen it before gunfire. Cold unease moved slowly through his chest. The front porch steps creaked dangerously beneath his boots as he climbed toward the farmhouse door. He unlocked it with the old brass key from the settlement paperwork. The door opened inward with a long groan. Dust. Cold air. Darkness. The smell hit him instantly. Old wood. Engine oil. Smoke soaked deep into walls from decades of winter fires. And underneath it all, his father. Impossible, but real. Every home carried its own scent. And somehow, after all these years, Harold Holloway still lived inside these walls. Wade stepped inside slowly. The furniture remained exactly where it had always been. Old plaid couch near the stone fireplace. Wooden kitchen table beneath the window. His father's reading chair in the corner beside stacked radio manuals. Nothing had changed. It looked less like abandonment and more like someone had simply stepped outside for a moment. Ghost entered behind him, but immediately moved away from the living room, toward the back of the house, toward the windows facing the barn. The dog stood rigid again, watching. Snow began falling harder outside. By evening, the storm fully settled over the mountains. Wade managed to get electricity running through half the house after fighting with the old breaker box in the basement. The furnace barely worked, so he built a fire instead. Orange light flickered across the living room walls while wind rattled branches outside. Ghost refused to settle down. The dog paced constantly between the fireplace and the back door, watching the barn, listening. At one point, he stood at the kitchen window, growling low into the darkness. Wade finally lost patience. "There's nothing out there." Ghost ignored him. Wade sighed heavily and lowered himself into his father's old chair beside the fire. His knees cracked painfully. The warmth helped slightly. Exhaustion settled over him all at once. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. 44 years of marriage gone. His home gone. His life reduced to a collapsing farmhouse nobody wanted. He rubbed his face slowly, then noticed something sitting on the bookshelf beside the chair. A framed photograph. Himself at 24 years old, Vietnam-era dress uniform, standing beside Harold outside this very farmhouse. Both men looked uncomfortable in front of the camera, neither smiling properly. But Harold's hand rested firmly on Wade's shoulder, protective, proud. Wade stared at the picture a long time. "I should have come back sooner," he whispered. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the storm deepened. Sometime after midnight, Wade fell asleep in the chair, and the nightmare came immediately. Afghanistan, Helmand Province, night operation, dust and gunfire and screaming over comms. Private Eli Turner bleeding out beside an overturned Humvee while Wade desperately tried to stop the blood with shaking hands. Then the explosion, the terrible sound, the helplessness. Wade jerked awake violently with a strangled gasp. The living room was dark except for dying firelight. His heart pounded hard enough to hurt. For one confused moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he heard it. Ghost barking, not ordinary barking. Warning barks, sharp, aggressive. Wade grabbed the revolver from the side table instantly, old reflexes returning fast. Ghost stood near the back door, body rigid, fur standing high along his neck, growling toward the barn. Wade crossed the room carefully and looked outside. Snow hammered sideways through darkness. The barn stood barely visible beneath the storm. But something moved near it. A shadow. Fast. Gone again. Wade narrowed his eyes. Probably just blowing branches. Probably. Then Ghost snarled, and somewhere out near the barn, a metallic clang echoed faintly through the storm, like steel striking steel beneath the earth. Wade felt cold crawl slowly up his spine. Ghost looked back at him. The old dog's cloudy eyes burned with urgency, as if he had been trying to warn Wade from the very beginning, and out beyond the snowstorm. Something on the Holloway farm was awake. Wade stood motionless at the kitchen window, one hand gripping the revolver, while snow hammered against the glass hard enough to sound like thrown gravel. Ghost barked again. Sharp, violent. The kind of bark military dogs used when they identified an active threat. Not wildlife. Not shadows. A threat. The old German shepherd stood at the back door, trembling with tension, claws scraping across warped wooden floorboards as he stared toward the barn. Wade narrowed his eyes through the storm. The barn was barely visible now beneath the snowfall. Wind bent the pine trees sideways, and darkness swallowed most of the property beyond the weak yellow glow from the farmhouse windows. Then, another metallic clang echoed faintly through the storm. Ghost lunged toward the door with a growl. Wade's pulse slowed instead of quickened. Combat instincts. Years ago, fear used to sharpen him. Now it simply hollowed him out. He grabbed the heavy flashlight hanging beside the back door and pulled on his old canvas coat. "Stay behind me," he muttered automatically. Ghost ignored that immediately. The moment Wade opened the door, freezing wind exploded into the kitchen. Snow blasted sideways across the porch. Ghost charged straight into the storm, Ghost! The dog was already halfway across the yard, running toward the barn through knee-deep snow with surprising speed for his age. Wade followed carefully, boots crunching through ice beneath fresh powder. The cold hit like knives. Every breath burned. The barn loomed larger as they approached, black against the storm clouds, its crooked roof groaning softly under the weight of snow. One loose metal sheet near the upper rafters banged repeatedly in the wind. Bang, bang, bang. But underneath that sound, something else. Faint, metallic, rhythmic. Wade reached the barn doors and shoved one inward. The hinges screamed. Inside, darkness swallowed everything beyond the flashlight beam. Dust drifted through cold air. The smell hit him immediately. Rotting hay, old oil, wet wood, and underneath it, something electrical. Ghost was already inside. The dog moved fast through the shadows, weaving between rusted equipment and broken stalls while growling low in his throat. Easy, boy. Wade swept the flashlight slowly across the interior. The barn looked abandoned for decades. Collapsed shelves leaned against walls. Rusted chains hung from beams overhead. Old farming tools lay scattered across the dirt floor beneath layers of dust and straw. Then the flashlight caught fresh tracks, boot prints, recent. Wade crouched immediately. Not his, not old. Fresh snowmelt still glistened inside the impressions. Someone had been inside the barn recently. Ghost barked sharply from the far corner. Wade rose and moved carefully toward the sound. The dog stood beside an old feeding trough near the rear wall, paws planted wide, staring downward, growling. Wade aimed the flashlight lower. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then Ghost began scratching furiously at the floorboards beneath the trough. Wood splintered beneath his claws. Ghost, stop! The dog ignored him completely. Wade stepped closer. The floor sounded different there, hollow. He frowned, knelt slowly, tapped the boards with the flashlight handle. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Then, clang. Metal underneath. Wade froze. Ghost barked loudly. Another sound answered from somewhere below. Not loud, but unmistakable. A metallic echo deep beneath the floor. Wade's stomach tightened. What the hell was under there? Suddenly headlights flashed through cracks in the barn walls. Both Wade and Ghost reacted instantly. Ghost spun toward the doors with a savage growl. Wade killed the flashlight. The barn dropped into darkness. Outside, tires crunched slowly through snow. A vehicle. Coming up the property road. Wade moved silently toward a broken side window and looked out carefully. A black SUV rolled slowly through the storm before stopping near the farmhouse. Engine idling. Headlights cutting white tunnels through snowfall. Ghost stood beside Wade, absolutely silent now, watching. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a black winter coat and cowboy hat. Denton Pike. Even through the storm, Wade recognized him immediately. The developer looked toward the barn, toward them. For several long seconds, he simply stood there in the snow. Then he smiled faintly. Not friendly, satisfied, like a man confirming something. Ghost's growl deepened dangerously. "What are you doing here?" Wade muttered under his breath. Denton finally climbed back into the SUV. The vehicle reversed slowly and disappeared down the mountain road. Its taillights vanished into the storm. Only then did Wade realize Ghost had moved back toward the feeding trough again. The dog resumed scratching violently at the floorboards. Wade stared down at the hidden section of flooring. Cold unease settled deeper into his chest. Something was buried under this barn, and Denton Pike apparently knew it. The storm trapped them inside the farmhouse for most of the next day. Snow piled against windows nearly halfway up the glass. Wind rattled the old roof continuously, making the entire house groan like an old ship at sea. Ghost refused to rest. Every few hours, the dog returned to the back door, whining softly toward the barn. By noon, Wade finally gave up trying to ignore him. "All right," he muttered. "You win." He pulled on gloves and heavy boots again. The storm had weakened slightly, though snow still fell steadily across the property. Wade carried a crowbar from the tool shed, while Ghost bounded ahead through drifts despite the stiffness in his back legs. Inside the barn, daylight filtered weakly through broken roof panels overhead. Ghost immediately returned to the feeding trough. Scratching, digging, obsessed. Wade shoved the trough aside with effort. It screeched across the floor, revealing warped wooden planks beneath thick dirt and straw. The hollow sound returned instantly when he struck the boards with the crowbar. Clang. Metal underneath. Wade's heartbeat quickened slightly. He drove the crowbar downward hard. Wood cracked apart. Ghost barked excitedly. Wade tore away more boards slowly until rusted steel finally appeared beneath decades of dust and debris. A hatch. Circular. Military-looking. About 4 feet wide. Ghost stood over it, growling softly. Wade brushed snow and dirt away with gloved hands. A faded emblem became visible on the metal surface. Not military exactly. Engineering corps, maybe. Hard to tell beneath rust. Then he noticed the lock. 6 rotating number dials. Old, heavy-duty. Not farm equipment. Military grade. "What the hell were you hiding, Dad?" Ghost suddenly lifted his head. Alert again. Wade heard it too this time. An engine. Far away. Approaching. He killed the flashlight instantly and stepped back into shadows. The sound faded after a minute. Maybe passing traffic. Maybe not. Wade waited quietly before kneeling beside the hatch again. His eyes drifted toward the $2 bill folded carefully inside his coat pocket. Something about it bothered him now. The numbers. The way Ghost reacted to it. The way Denton Pike looked at it in court. Wade slowly pulled the bill free. Ghost immediately focused on it, whining softly. Wade held it beneath the flashlight beam again, and this time he saw them clearly. Numbers. Very faint pencil markings hidden along the edge. 6 digits. His chest tightened. No. That couldn't be coincidence. Ghost nudged the bill urgently with his nose. "You've got to be kidding me." Wade looked from the numbers to the lock, then back again. Outside, wind moved heavily through the pine trees surrounding the farm. The mountains stood silent beneath endless snowfall, and somewhere deep below Wade Holloway's feet. Something waited in darkness beneath the barn his father built. Something hidden long before Sharon slid a $2 bill across a courtroom table. Something Harold Holloway apparently believed his son would one day need to find. Ghost sat beside the hatch, staring downward, listening, waiting. As if the old dog already understood what Wade was only beginning to realize. The Holloway farm had never been abandoned. It had been guarding something. Wade sat alone at the kitchen table long after midnight, with the $2 bill spread carefully beneath the lantern light. Ghost lay beside the wood stove, but the old shepherd wasn't asleep. His ears kept twitching toward the barn, toward the hatch hidden beneath the feeding trough. Snow drifted softly outside the windows now, calmer than before, though the mountains still disappeared beneath clouds heavy enough to swallow moonlight. Wade rubbed tired hands across his face. The 6 faded numbers written along the edge of the bill matched the lock exactly. That fact alone should have been impossible. His father had given him that bill over 40 years ago, long before the divorce, long before Sharon, long before Denton Pike suddenly appeared interested in a dead mountain farm nobody wanted, which meant Harold Holloway had planned something decades in advance. Wade leaned back slowly in the chair. His father was many things. Quiet, stubborn, hard to know. But Harold was not dramatic. He didn't create mysteries for amusement. If Harold hid something beneath that barn, there was a reason. Ghost suddenly stood. The growl started low in his chest again. Wade turned immediately toward the kitchen window. Headlights. Far down the mountain road. Moving slowly toward the farm. Not Denton Pike's SUV this time. Different vehicle. Older. Wade killed the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed the kitchen. Ghost moved silently beside him as Wade stepped near the window. The headlights crawled closer through the trees before finally stopping near the property fence. Engine idling. Wade waited. Nothing happened at first. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out carrying a flashlight. Tall, heavy coat, broad shoulders, Sheriff Tom Grady. Wade exhaled slowly. That didn't relax him. If anything, it made him more uneasy. Sheriff Grady swept his flashlight across the property before finally heading toward the porch. Ghost's growl deepened. "Easy," Wade whispered. A knock came moments later. 3 hard strikes. Official. Wade opened the door halfway. Cold wind rushed inside immediately. Sheriff Grady smiled politely beneath snowflakes collecting in his mustache. "Evening, Wade." "Sheriff? Mind if I come in?" Wade considered saying no. Instead, he stepped aside silently. Grady entered slowly, stomping snow from his boots while his eyes moved carefully around the farmhouse, observing everything. Not casually either, professionally. Ghost stood near the stove watching him without blinking. The sheriff noticed. "He always this friendly?" "He's deciding." Grady chuckled softly, but his eyes kept moving around the room. They paused briefly on the muddy crowbar leaning near the back door, then toward the barn outside the kitchen windows, then back to Wade. "Folks in town said you moved back up here." "Looks that way." "You planning on staying?" Wade said nothing. The sheriff removed his gloves carefully. "You know this property's caused problems over the years." "What kind of problems?" Grady shrugged. "Hunters disappearing, trespassers, strange reports." He smiled faintly. "Mountain people like stories." Ghost growled again. The sheriff glanced down at the dog. "He doesn't like me much. He likes honest people." That landed harder than Wade intended. For one brief second, Grady's smile tightened, then it returned. "Denton Pike mentioned he stopped by yesterday." Wade watched him carefully now. "There a reason everybody's suddenly interested in this farm?" The sheriff shrugged again. "Denton buys land. That's what he does." "He buys dead farms in the middle of nowhere?" "Sometimes dead things become valuable." Silence settled heavily between them. Wind rattled the old windows. Ghost took one slow step closer to the sheriff. Grady noticed immediately. "You should be careful up here, Wade." "Careful of what?" "Isolation." The sheriff looked around the dark farmhouse. "Old veterans sometimes struggle alone after everything." There it was. Not concern. Warning disguised as concern. Wade knew the tone well. Military intelligence officers used it during interrogations. Friendly voices carrying sharp edges underneath. Ghost suddenly barked once. Violent. Explosive. The sheriff flinched slightly. Wade turned. The dog stared toward the back window facing the barn. Growling. Someone was out there. Wade saw it too now. A flashlight beam moving briefly near the barn doors before disappearing behind the structure. Sheriff Grady followed his gaze. Then something strange happened. The sheriff did not look surprised, only irritated. He moved immediately toward the door. "I should get going." "That somebody with you?" "No." "You sure?" Grady pulled on his gloves again. "Mountain shadows play tricks this time of year." Then he paused beside Wade. His voice lowered slightly. "Whatever your father left behind up here." He looked toward the barn one last time. "Some things are better left buried." The sheriff left without another word. His vehicle disappeared into the snowfall moments later. But Wade remained standing at the window, because another set of tracks now crossed the property. Fresh tracks, leading toward the barn, not Grady's. Ghost was already at the back door. Wade grabbed the revolver again. "Stay close." They crossed the yard carefully through shin-deep snow. The flashlight beam cut through darkness in thin white slices. The barn doors stood partly open. Wade was certain he had closed them earlier. Ghost entered first, silent now, predatory. Wade followed. Cold air moved strangely inside the barn. Not natural wind, airflow, coming from somewhere below. Then Wade heard movement overhead. He spun instantly. The flashlight beam caught a man climbing through the upper hayloft window. Young, heavy coat, camera around his neck. The stranger nearly slipped before disappearing into the storm outside. "Stop!" Wade chased him out into the snow, but the man reached a waiting pickup hidden behind the tree line and sped away down the mountain road. Ghost barked furiously beside him. Wade memorized the company logo painted briefly across the truck door before it vanished. Pike Development Group. Back inside the barn, Wade stood breathing hard while snow drifted through the broken roof above. Ghost returned immediately to the hidden hatch beneath the feeding trough. The dog sniffed intensely around the metal edges, then suddenly scratched at the nearby wall. Wade frowned. He moved the flashlight beam closer. Old shelves lined the wall beside the hatch. Rusted tools, broken pulleys, dust-covered fuel cans. Nothing unusual. Until Ghost barked again and shoved his nose behind a loose wooden panel. Wade pulled the panel away carefully. Something slid free behind it. A notebook, black leather, military style. Wade stared at it silently. His father's handwriting covered the front. Field log, HH, 1987. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Wade opened the notebook slowly. Inside were pages of diagrams, radio frequencies, maps, coordinates, engineering sketches, and notes written in Harold's precise block lettering. December 14th, 1987. Observed unauthorized survey activity near North Ridge again tonight. Pike interests increasing sooner than expected. Wade frowned immediately. Pike. Not Denton Pike. Too old. Maybe his father. He kept reading. If they ever discover the lower system before Wade returns, contingency route must remain sealed. Wade's pulse slowed. Lower system? Ghost whined softly beside him. Another entry caught Wade's eye. Wade called today from Coronado. Said deployment might last another 6 months. He sounded tired. Tried to hide it. Same as always. Wade swallowed hard. His father wrote this 37 years ago. Another page. Saw Sharon in town with Denton Pike this afternoon. She doesn't know I recognized him. Need to accelerate preparations. Wade froze completely. Snow hissed softly outside the barn. Ghost lifted his head suddenly again. Alert. Then headlights appeared once more beyond the trees. Not one vehicle this time. 2. Far down the mountain road. Watching the farm from a distance. Wade slowly closed the notebook. The old dead farm no longer felt abandoned. It felt surrounded. And somewhere beneath his boots, under the frozen ground, beneath the hatch his father built decades earlier, something important enough to scare powerful men was waiting in darkness. Ghost stood beside Wade, staring toward the hidden steel door. The old shepherd's scarred body trembled slightly with tension, but not fear. Recognition, as if somewhere deep inside his military instincts, Ghost already understood this place was not simply a farm anymore. It was a battlefield. The old German shepherd stood rigid beside the hidden steel hatch, while snow hissed softly through cracks in the barn walls. His cloudy eyes stayed fixed on the darkness beneath the floorboards, as though he could hear something Wade couldn't, or remember something buried deep inside instincts older than either of them. Wade slid Harold's notebook carefully into his coat pocket. His hands felt colder now, not from winter, from realization. His father had known about the Pike family in 1987. Decades before, Denton Pike smiled across a courthouse table. Decades before, Sharon handed Wade the $2 bill. That meant none of this was random. Not the farm, not the bill, not even the divorce, maybe. Ghost suddenly lowered his body close to the floor, listening. Wade heard it a second later. Vehicles, far away, more than one engine climbing the mountain road. He killed the flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed the barn. Ghost moved silently beside him, while Wade stepped toward the broken side window overlooking the property. Two pairs of headlights crawled slowly through the trees below, not approaching openly. Watching. Waiting. The engines eventually stopped somewhere beyond the North Ridge, too far to see clearly through snowfall, but close enough to feel. Wade narrowed his eyes. Military surveillance posture. Observation without engagement. He knew the tactic well. Ghost growled quietly. "They're waiting for something," Wade whispered. Or someone. The thought settled heavily in his chest. He looked back toward the steel hatch. Maybe they were waiting for him to open it. The wind outside deepened as night settled fully over the mountains. Wade spent the next hour inside the farmhouse studying the faded 6-digit code on the $2 bill, while Ghost paced endlessly between the stove and the windows. The old shepherd refused to rest. Every few minutes he stopped beside the back door facing the barn. Watching. Wade sat at the kitchen table with Harold's notebook open beneath lantern light. Most pages contained engineering sketches Wade barely understood. Signal relays, power routing diagrams, tunnel structures. Some entries were more personal. February 9th, 1992. Wade came home today. Didn't tell Sharon about the panic attacks. Tried to smile through dinner. Hands shook when helicopters passed overhead. Ghost would have understood him. Wade frowned. Ghost? That entry was written years before Wade ever met his military K-9. He flipped backward through pages quickly, then found another entry. March 4th, 1971. Dogs understand damaged men better than most people do. Wade stared silently at the handwriting. His father always wrote like a man trying to leave breadcrumbs behind. Never full explanations, only pieces. Outside, wind rattled the windows violently. Ghost barked once, sharp, urgent. Wade looked up instantly. The dog stood at the back door again, this time whining softly. Not warning. Insistence. All right. Wade rose slowly, knees aching. He grabbed the lantern, revolver, heavy coat, and crowbar again. Ghost was already waiting at the door. Snow reached nearly knee-deep outside now. The storm clouds pressed low over the mountains, turning the entire world silver blue beneath moonlight, trapped behind snow. The barn stood dark ahead of them. Waiting. Inside, the cold felt sharper somehow. The hidden hatch sat exposed beneath the moved feeding trough, rust glistening faintly beneath lantern light. Ghost moved immediately beside it. Tail stiff, ears forward. Wade crouched slowly beside the lock. 6 rotating dials. Military construction. Heavy steel. His father built this to survive something serious. Wade unfolded the $2 bill carefully. The faded pencil marks were barely visible now beneath flickering light. 417263. He hesitated, suddenly aware his life still possessed one final moment where everything could remain simple. He could walk away, sell the property, leave Montana, forget the hatch existed. But then he remembered Sharon's face in the courtroom, the laughter, the pity, and Denton Pike watching the bill like it mattered more than money. Wade slowly turned the lock dials. 4, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3. The final dial clicked softly into place. Nothing happened at first. Then, clunk. Deep beneath the floor, Ghost barked immediately. The steel hatch released upward slightly with a hiss of ancient air. Wade froze. Cold wind drifted upward from below, carrying a smell untouched by time. Metal, dust, old machinery, electricity, not decay, maintenance. His pulse slowed automatically. Mission focus returning. Ghost backed away slightly, but kept staring downward into the darkness. Wade wedged the crowbar beneath the hatch edge and pulled. The steel door groaned open. Beneath it, concrete stairs descending into darkness. Deep. Far deeper than any ordinary basement. The lantern light revealed walls reinforced with thick steel plating disappearing underground. A faint red glow flickered somewhere below. Electricity. Still running. After all these years. "What the hell did you build down here, Dad?" Ghost whimpered softly. Wade noticed something then. Fresh boot prints. On the stairs. Recent. Someone else had opened this hatch before. Recently. Every muscle in Wade's body tightened instantly. He killed the lantern. Darkness swallowed them again. He listened. Nothing. Only distant humming from below. Generators, maybe. Ghost remained silent beside him, waiting for instruction. Wade drew the revolver slowly. Old instincts flooded back hard enough to make his breathing change. Room clearing. Threat assessment. Tunnel entry. He remembered Iraq suddenly. Underground weapons bunkers outside Mosul. Men disappearing into darkness and never returning. The memory hit fast and sharp. Too fast. His heartbeat spiked. Hands tightening involuntarily. Sweat despite the cold. Ghost pressed against his leg immediately, grounding him, bringing him back. Wade closed his eyes briefly. Breathed once. Twice. The panic passed enough to function. "Good boy," he whispered. The old shepherd looked up at him calmly, waiting, trusting. Wade picked up the lantern again. This time he turned the flame lower. Then together they descended into the darkness beneath the Holloway farm. The stairs spiraled downward farther than seemed possible beneath a mountain barn. Concrete walls dripped with condensation. Thick electrical cables ran overhead through steel brackets. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became. Ghost moved ahead carefully. Every few steps he paused to listen. Then finally, the staircase ended. Wade stepped into a massive underground corridor and stopped breathing. The bunker stretched beneath the mountain like something built for war. Steel blast doors, generator systems humming softly, rows of old communication equipment covered in dust yet somehow preserved, maps mounted across walls, military filing cabinets, crates marked with faded government symbols, a Cold War command center buried beneath a dead farm in Montana. The lantern trembled slightly in Wade's hand. Ghost walked slowly forward through the corridor, claws clicking softly against concrete. Then the dog stopped beside one wall. Wade turned the lantern. Photographs, dozens of them pinned carefully beside maps and documents. Harold Holloway, younger, standing beside military officers, construction crews, communication towers. Then another photograph. Wade himself. At 23. Marine haircut. Dress blues. Completely unaware someone had taken the picture. Below it, Harold had written one sentence in black marker. He survived the war. Now I need to help him survive coming home. Wade felt something crack quietly inside his chest. Ghost pressed close beside him again. Then suddenly, the old shepherd barked sharply toward the far end of the bunker. Wade lifted the lantern higher. And there, at the end of the corridor, a single television screen flickered faintly blue in the darkness. Powered on. Waiting. Beside it sat a stack of VHS tapes. And on top of them, one label written in Harold Holloway's unmistakable handwriting. For Wade. If they ever break you enough to come home. Wade stared at the words while cold silence settled through the underground bunker. Far above them, snow buried the Holloway farm deeper beneath the Montana mountains. And somewhere outside in the storm, men were still watching the property, waiting for Wade Holloway to discover what his father died protecting. But down beneath the mountain, in the hidden bunker buried under 50 years of silence and steel, the outside world suddenly felt very far away. Wade stood motionless in the underground corridor, while the old television screen flickered pale blue against the concrete walls. Ghost moved carefully through the bunker beside him, nails clicking softly against the floor. The shepherd no longer growled. Now he sniffed, investigating, learning. The underground air carried a strange warmth after the brutal cold outside. Old generators hummed somewhere deeper in the complex, steady and alive like the heartbeat of something sleeping beneath the mountain. Wade slowly lowered the lantern. The bunker was enormous, far larger than anything Harold Holloway could have built alone. Metal shelves lined the walls stacked with sealed military containers. Thick communication cables disappeared into ceilings reinforced with steel beams. Old radio systems sat beneath dust covers beside reel-to-reel machines and rows of blinking analog equipment that somehow still functioned after decades underground. A command center. Not survival storage. Not paranoia. Purpose-built. Professional. Ghost stopped beside one wall suddenly. Wade turned the lantern beam. Maps. Hundreds of them. Montana wilderness grids. Military communication routes. Underground tunnel schematics. Some marked with red circles and handwritten notes in Harold's precise block lettering. Others carried faded government stamps. Classified. Wade stared in disbelief. His father was a mechanic, a farmer, a quiet old mountain man who fixed tractors and barely spoke during town meetings. Except apparently he wasn't. The realization settled slowly and heavily inside Wade's chest. Maybe he never truly knew Harold Holloway at all. Ghost moved farther down the corridor toward another steel door standing partially open. Wade followed cautiously. Inside was a workshop unlike anything he expected. Long work tables covered with electronic parts and soldering equipment. Shelves filled with engineering manuals. Radio towers sketched across giant drafting papers pinned to walls. And journals. Dozens of them. Black leather notebooks identical to the one Wade found hidden in the barn, each carefully labeled by year. Almost 40 years of records. Wade picked up one slowly. Inside, Harold's handwriting filled every page. Technical diagrams mixed with personal observations. Signal integrity holding stable through winter conditions. Pike survey teams increasing northern activity again. Need to reinforce secondary access route before spring thaw. Wade turned another page. Wade called from Kabul today. Tried to sound strong. Could hear exhaustion underneath every word. Another page. Sharon no longer looks at him the same way. He notices. Pretends not to. Wade closed the journal abruptly. His throat tightened unexpectedly. His father had seen everything. Every crack in Wade's marriage. Every sleepless year. Every quiet collapse Wade believed he hid from the world. Ghost nudged Wade's hand softly, grounding him again. The old shepherd moved toward a metal cabinet near the far wall. Inside were photographs, hundreds. Wade flipped through them slowly beneath lantern light. Harold standing beside military officers in Vietnam. Construction crews building underground facilities. Communication towers hidden deep in forests. Then photographs of Wade, at 20, 25, 30. Some Wade never knew existed. One picture stopped him cold. Wade sitting alone on this very farm porch sometime after his first Afghanistan deployment. Younger then, but hollow-eyed already. Ghost wasn't there yet. Wade sat staring at the mountains while Harold stood inside the doorway, watching his son with quiet concern. On the back, Harold had written, "The war followed him home this time." Wade swallowed hard. His father had documented his suffering the way other men documented weather. Carefully. Quietly. Without judgment. The television screen crackled suddenly behind him. Ghost barked sharply. Wade turned. The screen flickered harder now, blue static rolling across it. Beside the television sat an old VHS player wired directly into the bunker's power system. And beside that, a single tape already waiting inside the machine, as if Harold expected this exact moment. Ghost walked toward it slowly, then sat, watching the television, waiting. Wade stared at the handwritten label again. For Wade, if they ever break you enough to come home. His chest hurt suddenly, not physically, something deeper. 44 years. All that time, Wade believed nobody understood what war had turned him into. Not Sharon, not civilians, not even himself most days. But Harold apparently understood everything. Maybe more than Wade did. Wade sat slowly in the metal chair facing the television. The room felt strangely intimate, despite concrete walls and military equipment, like a confession chamber built beneath a mountain. Ghost settled beside his chair immediately, close enough for Wade's hand to rest against the dog's scarred neck. Outside the bunker, wind howled faintly through unseen vents. Wade inserted the tape. The machine clicked loudly. Static rolled across the screen. Then the image stabilized. Harold Holloway appeared sitting at the farmhouse kitchen table upstairs. Younger, stronger. Gray beginning to touch his hair, but not yet old. He stared directly into the camera for several silent seconds before speaking. Wade. Just hearing his father's voice again nearly broke him immediately. Not because Harold sounded emotional, because he sounded calm, steady, alive. I don't know how long it's been since I recorded this, Harold continued. Maybe I'm already gone. Maybe you're watching this because something finally pushed you back up this mountain. He paused. A small, sad smile crossed his face. Or maybe somebody finally broke your heart bad enough. Wade looked away briefly. Ghost rested his head against Wade's knee. Harold continued quietly. If you found this place, then Sharon left. The words hit like a hammer. Wade stared at the screen. How did you know? He whispered. On screen, Harold rubbed tired hands together. She started disappearing years before you noticed. Not physically, emotionally. He sighed softly. You were disappearing too, just in different directions. Wade felt his throat tightening painfully now. I tried warning you once, Harold said. You remember? Memory hit Wade instantly. Summer evening. Harold standing beside the old barn saying quietly, a man can survive war easier than loneliness sometimes. Back then, Wade thought his father was talking about himself. Maybe he wasn't. Harold leaned closer toward the camera. You spent your whole life believing strength meant carrying pain quietly. He smiled sadly. That's the Holloway curse. My father had it too. Ghost's ears twitched softly beside Wade. I built this place because I knew someday men would come looking for what's buried under this mountain. Harold's expression hardened slightly now. And I knew someday you'd need somewhere the world couldn't reach you. Wade frowned. What's buried here? As if answering directly, Harold looked toward the camera again. The bunker isn't the secret, Wade. Silence filled the room. The communications network is. Wade sat forward slowly. Harold continued. During Vietnam, I worked on underground relay systems the government later buried. Some people made fortunes covering up what happened out here afterward. He paused carefully. The Pike family was part of it from the beginning. Wade's pulse slowed. Outside the bunker, somewhere far above them, snow continued burying the farm beneath darkness. Harold's voice lowered. They'll come eventually. Men always come when money and secrets share the same grave. The screen flickered briefly. I hid everything because I knew one thing for certain. Harold looked directly into the camera now. You'd survive longer than I would. Wade felt tears burning unexpectedly behind his eyes. He hated crying, always had. But hearing his father speak with such quiet certainty cracked something open inside him. "You think war ruined you," Harold said softly. "It didn't." Ghost lifted his head slightly. "The world just forgot how to understand men like you." Wade finally looked away completely then, because the old man on the screen had just spoken aloud the one truth Wade spent his entire life trying not to admit. Ghost pushed closer against his leg, steady, loyal, present. Harold's image flickered again. Then his expression shifted suddenly. Concern, urgency. "If Denton Pike finds this bunker before you understand what's really here," he paused heavily, "burn everything." Wade froze. "What?" Harold leaned closer toward the camera. "Listen carefully. The lower network still works. Every file, every recording, every transmission archive." His eyes darkened. Some men would kill to keep those buried. The television crackled violently. Then the screen went black. Silence swallowed the bunker. Only the generators remained humming softly beneath the mountain. Wade sat frozen in the chair. Ghost looked up at him quietly. For the first time since the courthouse, since Sharon, since the laughter, Wade felt something worse than humiliation. He felt grief, because suddenly he understood something terrible. Harold Holloway had spent decades preparing this place not for himself, but for his son. Every wall, every journal, every hidden tunnel beneath the mountain, built by a father who knew someday Wade Holloway would come home broken. And outside, beyond the storm and darkness surrounding the Holloway farm, headlights appeared once more near the tree line, watching, waiting, because Denton Pike now knew Wade had entered the bunker, and whatever Harold Holloway buried beneath the mountain, people were willing to fight for it. Wade sat motionless in the underground bunker long after the television screen went black. The old VHS player clicked softly in the silence. Ghost rested beside his chair, one paw stretched across Wade's boot, like the dog understood the difference between solitude and loneliness. Above them, somewhere beyond hundreds of feet of frozen mountain rock, snow buried the Holloway farm deeper beneath darkness. But down here, time felt trapped. The bunker still smelled faintly of machine oil, warm electrical wiring, and old paper preserved underground for decades. Generators hummed steadily through the walls with the calm rhythm of something built to survive disasters. Wade stared at the blank television screen. His father's final words echoed painfully inside him. "The world just forgot how to understand men like you." No one had ever said something like that to Wade before. Not Sharon, not military therapists, not commanders, not even Wade himself. Because after enough years, a man stopped trying to explain what war did to him. He simply carried it, quietly, like Harold carried this bunker. Ghost suddenly lifted his head, alert again. Wade heard it too this time, a dull metallic vibration somewhere deeper inside the mountain. Not footsteps, machinery, running. Wade stood slowly. Every joint protested. Ghost rose immediately beside him. The shepherd moved ahead down the corridor, while Wade grabbed the lantern and revolver again. The bunker extended much farther than he first realized. Hallways branched into separate rooms filled with communication equipment and storage areas. Thick steel doors carried faded warning labels from another era. Authorized personnel only. Emergency network access, restricted transmission control. Wade moved carefully through the underground complex, while Ghost inspected each corridor ahead of him. The deeper they went, the more personal the bunker became. One room contained military cots and survival supplies stacked neatly against walls. Another held filing cabinets full of engineering records. Then Wade entered a smaller room near the rear section of the bunker and stopped cold. It was his room, or something close enough to make his chest tighten painfully. Harold had recreated part of Wade's military life underground. A framed Navy SEAL insignia hung beside shelves filled with books Wade loved as a teenager. Fishing lures from childhood trips rested inside glass jars. Old photographs covered one wall. Wade at 6 years old holding a trout beside the Bitterroot River. Wade graduating BUD/S training. Wade in uniform after Afghanistan. Harold had preserved his son's entire life underground, like a man afraid history might erase him otherwise. Ghost moved toward the bed in the corner and sniffed the blanket carefully before lying down. Wade sat slowly at the small desk beneath the photographs. More journals waited there. Different from the technical notebooks. Personal journals. He opened one carefully. October 11th, 2004. Wade called tonight. Said he might re-enlist for another overseas contract. Sharon cried after he left the room. He pretended not to notice. Another page. December 7th, 2008. I asked Wade if he sleeps. He laughed instead of answering. That usually means no. Wade swallowed hard. The handwriting remained calm, measured. But beneath every sentence lived quiet fear. Harold Holloway spent decades watching his son disappear slowly inside himself, and never stopped trying to build him a way home. Ghost suddenly stood again, growling softly toward the hallway. Wade heard voices, muffled, far above. He froze instantly. Men. Inside the barn. The realization sharpened everything. Wade killed the lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the room. Ghost moved silently beside him while Wade crossed back into the main corridor. The bunker had emergency monitors mounted near one communications station. Old black and white security feeds flickered weakly across dusty screens, still powered by underground generators. Wade switched them on carefully. Static rolled across to several monitors. Then images stabilized. Barn interior. Farmhouse porch. North Ridge tree line. And there. 3 men moving through the barn above them with flashlights. One of them was Denton Pike. The others carried rifles. Ghost growled deep and dangerous beside the monitor screens. Wade's pulse slowed automatically. Combat mode. The old familiar calm returning. Denton Pike crouched near the feeding trough, studying the exposed hatch. "He opened it," one man said. "No kidding," Denton snapped. "You think he's still down there?" Denton looked directly toward the hidden hatch. "Yes." Wade stared at the screen. No panic. Only calculation. The old instincts came back faster than expected. Entry points, exit routes, numbers of threats, weapons. Ghost watched the monitors intensely. The dog understood tension immediately. Denton knelt beside the hatch and touched the steel edge carefully. "He figured out the bill," he muttered. One of the men frowned. "You sure Holloway even knows what's down there?" "No." Denton's expression hardened. But his father did. Wade's grip tightened around the revolver. Ghost's ears flattened slightly. Denton Pike knew far more than he admitted. The developer stood slowly. "My father spent 30 years trying to locate this bunker." Wade froze. Denton continued quietly. "And now the old man's idiot son finally opens it for us." The other men laughed softly, but Wade felt something colder than anger move through him. Harold wasn't paranoid. Everything he built beneath this mountain was real. Ghost barked suddenly at another monitor. Wade turned. 2 more vehicles had appeared near the property fence. More armed men stepping into the snow. The farm was surrounded. Denton's voice crackled faintly through the security audio. "Search the house first, then we go below." Ghost looked up at Wade immediately. Waiting. Trusting. The old shepherd had done this before. Afghanistan. Night raids. Tunnel systems. Danger moving closer while silence narrowed around them. Wade rested one hand gently against Ghost's scarred neck. "You still got one more mission in you, old man?" Ghost's tail moved once against the concrete floor. That was enough. Wade turned back toward the bunker corridors. There had to be another exit. Harold never built military systems with single access points. He searched quickly through nearby rooms until he found wall maps showing underground tunnel routes branching beneath the mountain. One line carried a handwritten note. Secondary emergency route. East Ridge access. Another route deeper underground carried a different note. Archive chamber. Wade stared at that one longer. Archive. The word from Harold's tape returned immediately. Every file, every recording, every transmission archive. Something hidden deeper inside the bunker mattered enough to make armed men climb a mountain during a blizzard. Wade looked toward the lower tunnel entrance, disappearing into darkness. Ghost whined softly. The dog smelled strangers above. Time was running out. Then another monitor flickered alive unexpectedly. Wade turned sharply. A hidden camera feed from inside the farmhouse kitchen. Sheriff Tom Grady had entered the house. Not in uniform this time. He moved calmly through the kitchen while speaking into a radio. Pike was right, Grady said. The lower system's active. Wade stared in disbelief. The sheriff opened one of Harold's journals on the kitchen table. His expression changed immediately. Fear. Real fear. Jesus Christ, Grady whispered. Denton's voice answered over radio static. What? Long silence. Then the sheriff spoke quietly. If these records ever get out. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Wade understood now. Whatever Harold discovered decades ago, it was bigger than land deals. Bigger than money. Ghost barked sharply again. The men above were opening the hatch. Wade heard steel grinding faintly through the bunker corridors. Denton Pike's voice echoed somewhere overhead. Spread out once we're below. Ghost stood directly in front of Wade now. Ready. Waiting for command. The old shepherd's cloudy eyes reflected faint bunker light, while distant footsteps began descending into the underground darkness. And for the first time in years, Wade Holloway no longer felt like a broken old veteran hiding from the world. He felt like a Navy SEAL again. The change happened quietly. Not dramatic, not heroic. One moment he was an old man sitting in the ruins of his life. The next, deep beneath a Montana mountain, while armed men descended into his father's bunker, something ancient and disciplined awakened inside him. Training. Instinct. Purpose. Ghost stood beside him perfectly still, ears forward, body tense like a loaded spring. The old shepherd understood immediately. The mission had changed. The bunker lights flickered softly overhead while distant footsteps echoed down the stairwell somewhere above. Wade studied the underground map one final time. 3 men entering through the main hatch. 2 more outside covering the property. Sheriff Grady upstairs. Denton Pike leading everything personally. Too many to fight head-on. Especially at 72 years old. Especially with Ghost slowing down from age and old injuries. But Wade knew something men like Denton Pike never understood. A man defending home fights differently than a man hunting profit. Ghost growled low. They were getting closer. Wade moved quickly through the corridor, shutting off unnecessary lights section by section until much of the bunker disappeared into darkness. The only remaining glow came from emergency strips along the lower walls. Red light. Dim enough to hide movement. Bright enough to navigate. Ghost stayed glued to Wade's side as they slipped deeper into the underground complex. The footsteps above reached the lower staircase. Voices echoed faintly now. Spread out. Denton Pike. Calm. Confident. This whole system's bigger than my father thought. Another voice answered nervously. You sure Holloway's armed? He was a SEAL. So? Denton laughed softly. He's 72. Ghost's lips peeled back silently. Wade rested one hand against the dog's neck. Easy. Not yet. They reached a heavy steel security door near the communications center. Wade examined the locking system quickly. Manual override still worked. He pulled the lever hard. Somewhere behind them, massive steel doors slammed shut automatically through connecting corridors. The sound thundered through the bunker. Shouts erupted instantly upstairs. "What the hell was that?" Ghost barked once sharply. The old shepherd's tail moved slightly now, working, focused. Wade finally allowed himself the smallest smile. "Still got it, huh?" The dog stared back as if insulted by the question. Then gunfire exploded somewhere down the corridor. Not aimed. Warning shots. Denton Pike's voice echoed through the bunker. "Wade!" Silence answered him. "You don't understand what you found down here." Wade crouched beside an old communications terminal and quickly powered it on. Dust-covered screens flickered to life beside him, while Ghost kept watch down the hallway. Static rolled across multiple surveillance feeds. Then images stabilized. Denton Pike and two armed men moved cautiously through the bunker entrance, carrying tactical flashlights. Sheriff Grady appeared behind them holding a shotgun. Fear sat openly on the sheriff's face now. Not greed. Fear. Whatever Harold buried beneath this mountain terrified him. Denton stopped near one of the old map walls. His flashlight beam drifted across military documents and transmission logs. Then his expression changed. Excitement. "Jesus Christ," one of the men whispered. Denton stepped closer to the wall. "These are original network schematics." The sheriff looked sick. "We should destroy everything and leave." "No." Denton's voice sharpened instantly. "You have any idea what this is worth?" Ghost suddenly stiffened beside Wade. The dog's ears tilted toward another tunnel farther east. Movement. Wade checked another monitor. Two additional men had entered through a secondary maintenance shaft. Denton was boxing them in. Smart. Wade studied the map quickly. The bunker's lower corridors formed a rough circle around the central archive chamber. If Denton reached the archives first, whatever Harold protected for 50 years would belong to Pike. Ghost whined softly. Wade looked down at him. "You know where to go?" The old shepherd turned immediately toward the eastern corridor, without hesitation. Wade trusted him completely. They moved silently through the bunker while voices echoed behind them. At one intersection, Ghost suddenly stopped dead, growling. Wade froze instantly. A flashlight beam appeared ahead. One of Pike's men approached carefully through the red emergency lighting, rifle raised. Ghost looked up at Wade. Waiting. Permission. Wade nodded once. The shepherd exploded forward silently. The man barely had time to react before Ghost slammed into him chest high, knocking the rifle sideways into concrete. Wade moved instantly, grabbing the weapon and forcing the man against the wall before the fight fully began. Fast, controlled, quiet, years of training returning automatically. The younger man stared in shock at the old veteran pinning him effortlessly against concrete. "Where's Pike?" Wade demanded quietly. The man said nothing. Ghost snarled inches from his face. Fear finally cracked him. "Archive room," he whispered. "Where?" The man pointed shakily deeper underground. Wade released him hard enough to send him stumbling backward. "Leave the mountain." The man didn't argue. He ran. Ghost watched him disappear before turning back toward Wade immediately. Ready again. The farther they moved underground, the stranger the bunker became. The lower levels looked less military and more secretive. No maps, no labels. Only reinforced steel doors and sealed archive rooms. One corridor contained shelves of reel-to-reel recordings stacked floor to ceiling. Another held filing cabinets marked with dates reaching back to the 1960s. Harold Holloway hadn't simply built a bunker. He built a vault. For truth. Ghost stopped beside another steel door and barked sharply. Wade pulled it open carefully. Inside, a communications hub, still active. Banks of radio equipment hummed beneath glowing analog displays. Massive tape storage systems lined the walls beside encrypted military transmitters, connected to underground cable networks disappearing deeper into the mountain. And at the center of the room sat a single red folder. Waiting. Wade picked it up slowly. Classified. Operation Black Ridge. His pulse slowed. He opened the file carefully. Photographs spilled across the desk. Military land seizures. Underground detention sites. Names of senators. Defense contractors. Illegal surveillance operations hidden beneath Montana wilderness during the Cold War. And one family name appeared over and over again. Pike. Ghost growled again suddenly. Too late. The shotgun blast thundered through the doorway. Concrete exploded beside Wade's head. Sheriff Grady stepped into the room, shaking visibly while aiming the shotgun with both hands. "Don't move," Ghost barked savagely. "Call your dog off!" Wade slowly raised his hands. The sheriff's face looked gray beneath the bunker lights. "You have no idea what's in those files." "I'm starting to." Grady swallowed hard. "Those records ruin people." "Good." The sheriff's hands trembled harder now. "You think Pike's the bad guy here?" He laughed nervously. "Pike's just another scavenger. Men in Washington buried this place decades ago." Ghost moved protectively in front of Wade. The sheriff noticed. "I don't want to hurt the dog." That sentence made Wade angrier than the shotgun. Ghost was family, the closest thing to unconditional loyalty Wade had left. "You won't." Suddenly, Denton Pike's voice echoed from behind the sheriff. "That depends on him." Denton stepped into view holding a pistol calmly at his side. Snow melted slowly from his coat onto the concrete floor. He looked almost relaxed. "Hell of a setup your father built." Wade said nothing. Denton glanced around the communications room with obvious admiration. "My father spent 30 years trying to locate this place." "And why couldn't he?" Denton smiled faintly. "Because Harold Holloway was smarter than both of us." For one strange moment, genuine respect crossed Denton's face. Then it vanished. "Give me the file, Wade." Ghost barked violently. The old shepherd positioned himself directly between Wade and the armed men, despite his aging body trembling from exhaustion. Denton noticed. "That dog's old." "He's enough." The developer sighed softly. "I'm trying to avoid bloodshed here." "Funny way of showing it." Denton stepped closer. "You think this bunker changes something? Sharon still left you. Your life still collapsed." He pointed toward the file. "All this does is make you dangerous." The words landed hard because they were partly true. Wade looked down briefly at Ghost. The dog stared back without hesitation. No pity, no judgment, only loyalty. Then suddenly, the bunker lights died. Darkness swallowed everything. Ghost lunged instantly. Gunfire exploded through the black corridors while alarms screamed somewhere deep beneath the mountain. And in the middle of the chaos, Wade realized someone else had shut the bunker down remotely. Someone who knew the system even better than Denton Pike. Darkness swallowed the underground chamber completely. For one violent second, the only sounds were gunfire, ricocheting metal, and Ghost's savage barking somewhere inside the blackness. Then emergency sirens began pulsing through the bunker. Red backup lights flickered dimly overhead. Ghost slammed into someone hard enough to send a body crashing across concrete. Sheriff Grady shouted in panic. Denton Pike cursed. Wade moved instantly. Training erased age for a few critical seconds. He grabbed the classified folder from the desk and rolled behind heavy communication equipment as another shotgun blast exploded through the room. Concrete dust filled the air. Ghost growled furiously nearby. "Get the dog off him!" Wade heard a man screaming now. Not badly hurt, terrified. Ghost had him pinned somewhere in the darkness. Wade used the confusion. He slipped through the rear doorway into another corridor, just as flashlight beams swept wildly across the communications room behind him. "Seal the exits!" Denton shouted. Ghost appeared beside Wade a heartbeat later. The old shepherd's chest heaved heavily now, breath steaming in the cold underground air. One ear, iron, bled slightly, but his eyes burned sharp and alert beneath the red emergency lights. "You good?" Ghost pressed against Wade's leg once. Still working, still protecting. Wade gripped the classified folder tightly while they moved deeper into the bunker. The alarms echoed endlessly through steel corridors now. Somewhere far above, the storm continued raging across the Bitterroot Mountains, burying the Holloway farm beneath wind and snow. But underground, everything was unraveling. Wade reached another sealed security door marked Archive Access. Electronic locks blinked red. Offline. He searched the nearby wall quickly until finding a manual override lever hidden behind steel paneling. Harold built redundancies into everything. Wade pulled the lever. The heavy archive door hissed open slowly. Cold air rolled outward from inside. Ghost hesitated briefly before entering first. The archive chamber was enormous, far larger than any room they'd passed so far. Rows upon rows of filing shelves stretched into darkness beneath low concrete ceilings. Reel-to-reel tapes filled metal cabinets beside thousands of paper documents, preserved inside sealed military containers. This wasn't just evidence. It was history. Hidden history. Wade swept the flashlight carefully across the room, while Ghost sniffed through shadows ahead. Then Wade saw the photographs, pinned across one entire wall. Military helicopters landing on remote Montana property. Underground construction projects hidden beneath wilderness. Armed security teams escorting senators and defense contractors. And in the center, a younger Harold Holloway standing beside communication towers built deep in the mountains. Not a farmer, an engineer, a military contractor, a man buried alive beneath his own cover story for decades. Wade opened the folder he carried. More photographs, more names, some familiar, some famous. Operation Black Ridge had apparently created hidden communication networks beneath several western states during the Cold War. Officially, the systems were abandoned after the 1970s. Unofficially, the files told another story entirely. Illegal surveillance, land theft, off-the-record detention sites, hidden monitoring stations buried beneath private property, and every road led back to the Pike family. Ghost barked sharply from deeper inside the archive chamber. Wade moved quickly toward him. The dog stood beside an old projection table covered with tape recordings and handwritten logs. One tape sat alone beneath a lamp still glowing dimly from emergency backup power. A note rested beside it in Harold's handwriting. "If Wade finds this before they do, listen immediately." Wade inserted the tape into a nearby recorder. Static crackled softly. Then Harold's voice filled the archive chamber. "If you're hearing this, then Denton Pike finally found the bunker." Wade froze. Harold sounded older on this recording. Tired. The Pike family helped build Black Ridge during the Cold War. They handled land acquisitions for the government. Most owners never knew what was buried beneath their property. Ghost paced nervously beside the shelves. Harold continued. "But after Vietnam, some of us discovered the system never shut down. Surveillance continued. Illegal transmissions. Disappearances." His voice lowered. "People died protecting these secrets." Wade stared into the darkness between shelves. "My team tried exposing it in 1978. 3 men vanished within a month." Harold paused heavily. "I buried the archives under this farm because the Holloway property sits directly above the central relay hub." The alarms pulsed louder overhead. Ghost growled suddenly toward the hallway. They were getting closer. Harold's voice continued through static. "The Pike family spent decades trying to recover these files before anyone else could." A pause. "Including Denton's father." Wade opened another file quickly. Inside were photographs of younger Denton Pike standing beside survey teams outside the Holloway property almost 20 years earlier. They had hunted this bunker for decades. Then Harold said something that made Wade's blood run cold. They targeted you because of me. Wade stopped breathing. When you joined the SEAL teams, the government flagged your name automatically through old Black Ridge records. Harold exhaled slowly. I believe Denton Pike stayed close to Sharon for years because he suspected eventually you'd inherit the farm. Wade leaned heavily against the archive table. No, that couldn't be true. Could it? Suddenly, memories shifted painfully in his mind. Denton appearing around town more often over the years. Sharon attending Pike Development charity events. The strange friendliness. The interest. The manipulation. Had all of it been connected? Ghost barked violently. Flashlights swept through the corridor outside. Too late. Denton Pike entered the archive chamber holding a pistol and flashlight. Sheriff Grady followed beside him, looking pale and exhausted. 3 armed men spread outward between shelves. Denton smiled faintly when he saw Wade. There it is. His flashlight settled on the files. 30 years of hunting finally pays off. Ghost stepped directly in front of Wade again. Hackles raised, teeth exposed. The old shepherd's body trembled now from exhaustion and age, but he still looked ready to tear through anyone who came close. Denton noticed. That dog would die for you. He already almost has. For one brief second, something flickered across Denton's face. Not guilt, recognition. Like maybe he understood loyalty enough to envy it. Then it vanished. Give me the archives. No. Denton sighed softly. You still think this is about justice? What's it about then? Survival. The developer moved closer carefully. These files destroy powerful people, not just politicians, intelligence agencies, defense contractors, men who bury problems permanently. Sheriff Grady swallowed hard. We should have burned this place years ago. Harold's voice still echoed faintly from the recorder behind Wade. If they corner you underground, there's another tunnel beneath the archive chamber. Denton heard it instantly. His eyes widened. There's another exit? Ghost barked explosively. The armed men moved forward. Then suddenly the floor trembled. Deep, violent, dust rained from the ceiling. Everyone froze. Another tremor rolled through the bunker. Somewhere deeper underground machinery roared to life automatically. Emergency systems. Harold built fail-safes into the bunker, and apparently someone had triggered them. Red warning lights flashed harder now. Archive purge sequence active. Sheriff Grady stared upward in horror. What did you do? Wade hadn't touched anything. Neither had Denton. Then Harold's recorded voice spoke one final sentence through the static-filled tape. If this system ever wakes up again, run. The bunker shook harder. Somewhere beyond the archive chamber, heavy blast doors began slamming shut throughout the underground complex, and Ghost suddenly spun toward the far end of the room, barking wildly at something hidden behind the shelves, a tunnel entrance, opening slowly beneath the mountain. The hidden passage groaned upward behind the archive shelves, while red emergency lights flashed violently across the bunker walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Steel screamed somewhere deep underground as automated blast doors sealed section after section of the complex. Ghost barked furiously at the opening. Wade didn't hesitate. Move! The old shepherd lunged toward the tunnel instantly. Wade grabbed the classified files and sprinted after him, just as Denton Pike shouted behind them. Stop him! Gunfire erupted through the archive chamber. Concrete exploded beside Wade's shoulder. Sheriff Grady stumbled backward in panic as the bunker shook harder beneath them. The hidden tunnel sloped sharply downward into darkness beneath the mountain. Emergency lights flickered weakly along the narrow passage while ancient ventilation fans groaned overhead. Ghost ran ahead despite his age, fast, focused, driven by something beyond instinct now. Another explosion thundered through the bunker behind them. The archive chamber doors slammed shut. Denton Pike's voice vanished beneath collapsing steel and alarms. Wade nearly lost his footing as the tunnel trembled violently again. What did you build down here, Dad? Ghost barked once ahead. Urgent. The passage split into two directions farther underground. One tunnel descended deeper beneath the mountain, the other angled upward. Ghost chose upward immediately. Wade trusted him without question. The shepherd's breathing sounded rougher now. Age and exhaustion were catching him hard, but he never slowed. The tunnel narrowed as they climbed. Water dripped from cracked concrete overhead. Thick electrical cables lined the walls beside old emergency lighting systems still powered somehow after decades underground. Then another blast shook the mountain, this one closer. The floor cracked beneath Wade's boots. Behind them, part of the tunnel collapsed in a roar of concrete and dust. Ghost spun instantly and barked sharply. Warning. Wade dove sideways just before debris crashed across the passage where he'd been standing seconds earlier. Dust swallowed everything. Silence followed, then coughing. Wade pushed himself upright painfully. His left shoulder burned where falling debris clipped him. Ghost stood nearby, trembling slightly beneath drifting dust clouds. Alive, still watching him. Good boy, Wade rasped. The old shepherd limped now, barely noticeable, but Wade saw it immediately. One rear leg dragging slightly after the tunnel collapse. Ghost ignored it completely. He moved forward again, always forward. The tunnel finally widened into another underground chamber unlike anything else in the bunker. Natural rock walls surrounded them now instead of reinforced concrete. Massive communication cables disappeared into darkness above underground rivers rushing beneath steel catwalks. This was the real heart of Black Ridge, the hidden relay system. Old Cold War transmission towers extended upward through shafts drilled directly into the mountain. Giant machines hummed faintly beneath layers of dust and age, and in the center of the chamber, a functioning communications console still glowing green. Wade approached carefully. One screen flashed repeatedly. External transmission link active. Someone outside the mountain had connected to the system. Ghost growled toward the darkness behind them. Not Denton. Someone else. The radio speaker crackled suddenly. Then a woman's voice filled the chamber. Wade Holloway? Wade froze. Who the hell? If you can hear this, listen carefully. My name is Evelyn Cross. Your father worked with my husband during Black Ridge. Wade stared at the speaker. Ghost barked once. We intercepted emergency activation signals from the bunker 30 minutes ago, the woman continued. You're running out of time. The mountain shook again. Somewhere far behind them, another explosion thundered underground. Wade grabbed the microphone cautiously. How do you know my father? Static crackled. Then, because Harold Holloway saved my life in 1979. Long silence followed. The woman's breathing sounded uneven through the speaker. Denton Pike's father tried killing everyone connected to the original archive team. Harold hid the records before they could disappear. Her voice lowered. And he built an escape route beneath the relay chamber for this exact reason. Ghost suddenly barked violently toward the far side of the cavern. Flashlights, moving through darkness. Denton Pike found another way down. Evelyn heard it too through the open microphone. They're close. Wade looked around desperately. Where's the exit? East tunnel beyond the river bridge. Harold marked it with blue paint. Ghost moved immediately. The shepherd had already found it. A narrow steel catwalk crossed roaring black water toward another tunnel, hidden deeper inside the cavern. Wade grabbed the files and followed. Behind them, voices echoed through the relay chamber. Split up! Denton Pike again. Closer now. Flashlights swept wildly across the giant underground room. Ghost reached the catwalk first, then froze. Wade saw it immediately. Part of the bridge had collapsed. A 10-foot gap hung above the underground river below. Freezing black water crashed violently through the rocks beneath them. No easy crossing. Gunfire cracked behind them. Bullets sparked against steel beams. Ghost barked sharply at Wade. Then before Wade could react, the old shepherd leaped across the gap, barely. His injured rear leg slipped against the far edge. For one horrifying second, Ghost dangled above the river. Then he clawed upward and disappeared safely onto the other side. Wade exhaled hard. Another bullet shattered metal beside his head. No choice. He backed up slightly, then jumped. Pain exploded through his shoulder as he hit the far edge awkwardly, barely catching the steel railing before falling backward into the river below. Ghost grabbed Wade's coat sleeve instantly, pulling, growling, holding him above the rushing black water with every ounce of strength left in his aging body. Wade clawed upward desperately, while Ghost refused to let go. Another section of catwalk collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks and steel. Denton Pike shouted furiously from the opposite side. Ghost finally pulled Wade fully onto solid ground. Wade lay there gasping for breath while the old shepherd collapsed beside him, trembling violently. His injured leg bled badly now. "Ghost!" The dog tried standing immediately, still working, still protecting. Wade grabbed him gently. "Easy. Easy, buddy." But Ghost kept staring toward the tunnel ahead. Move. Mission first. Wade swallowed hard. Then he saw the blood. Dark stains spreading through Ghost's fur near his ribs. Not from the tunnel collapse. Gunshot. Somewhere during the blackout chaos. The realization hit Wade like a knife. "No, no, no!" Ghost leaned weakly against him, but still tried moving forward, still trying to lead him out. Wade's vision blurred suddenly. Not panic, not fear. Something worse. Love. The old shepherd had followed Wade through war, nightmares, divorce, humiliation, and now this mountain. And he was dying anyway. Another explosion shook the cavern behind them. Denton Pike's men were crossing another route now. Time vanished instantly. Wade forced himself upright and lifted Ghost carefully into his arms, despite the pain screaming through his shoulder. The shepherd whined softly, but never fought him. "You carried me long enough," Wade whispered hoarsely. "My turn." The escape tunnel climbed sharply upward through natural rock formations beneath the mountain. Freezing wind drifted through cracks overhead now. Close to the surface, Ghost's breathing grew weaker against Wade's chest with every step. Wade kept talking to him anyway, the way soldiers talk during medevac flights when silence feels too dangerous. "Remember Kandahar?" Ghost's ears twitched faintly. "You dragged me out of that burned convoy." Another painful climb upward. "You remember sleeping beside my bed after Sharon left?" Ghost's cloudy eyes looked up weakly at him. Wade's throat tightened. "You're the only damn thing that never gave up on me." The tunnel suddenly opened into blinding white light. Snowstorm. Night sky. Mountains. They emerged halfway up the eastern ridge overlooking the Holloway farm far below, and above the storm. Helicopters. Black military helicopters cutting through snowfall toward the property. Searchlights sweeping across the mountainside. Federal response teams. Evelyn Cross must have transmitted the archive files already. Below them, the barn exploded. Flames burst upward through the storm as part of the bunker collapsed beneath the farm. Denton Pike's men scattered across the snow. Sirens echoed faintly through the valley now. Ghost lifted his head weakly toward the helicopters. Then finally, for the first time all night, the old shepherd stopped trying to move. Wade dropped to his knees in the snow, holding him close while rotor blades thundered overhead. "No," Wade whispered brokenly. "Stay with me." Ghost looked up at him quietly, trusting, loyal, the same way he always had. Then Wade pressed his forehead gently against the old dog's scarred face and finally said the truth out loud. "You saved my life more times than I deserved." Snow fell softly around them beneath the helicopter lights, and somewhere deep below the mountain, the secrets Harold Holloway died protecting were finally coming to the surface. The helicopters circled over the Bitterroot Mountains through sheets of snow while floodlights swept across the shattered Holloway farm below. Federal vehicles crawled up the mountain road in long lines, headlights glowing through the storm like moving fire beneath the trees. The bunker was still collapsing underground. Every few minutes, another muffled explosion rolled through the mountain. Wade barely noticed any of it. He sat in the snow holding Ghost. The old shepherd's breathing had grown shallow and uneven against his chest. Blood darkened the fur along Ghost's ribs where the shotgun pellets had torn through him underground. A medic team reached them first. 2 men in cold-weather tactical gear climbed the ridge carrying trauma kits and thermal blankets. "Sir, we need the dog now." Wade tightened his grip instinctively. "He stays with me." One medic knelt carefully beside him. "Mr. Holloway, if we don't move fast, he won't make it." That word hit Wade harder than the gunfire. Make it. As if Ghost wasn't just a dog. As if he wasn't family. The medic's voice softened. "He's still fighting. Let us help him." Ghost lifted his head weakly toward Wade. Trusting him. Always trusting him. Wade swallowed hard and finally nodded once. The medics moved carefully, placing oxygen over Ghost's muzzle while wrapping blankets around his body. The old shepherd whimpered faintly when they lifted him onto the stretcher. Wade followed without feeling the freezing wind anymore. Below them, the Holloway farm burned against the storm-dark mountains. The barn collapsed inward with a shower of sparks and flame. Federal agents surrounded Denton Pike and 3 surviving men near the property fence. Pike stood in handcuffs beneath helicopter lights, snow collecting slowly across his black coat. But even restrained, he still watched the mountain. Watched Wade. Watched the bunker die beneath the earth. Not defeated, only angry. Wade stared back without expression. The helicopters carried them down to Missoula before sunrise. Ghost disappeared into emergency veterinary surgery the moment they landed. Wade sat alone in a hospital hallway afterward, still wearing blood-stained clothes and melted snow across his boots. Exhaustion settled into him slowly now that the danger had passed. His shoulder throbbed from the tunnel collapse. Cuts covered his hands. But none of it mattered. Only Ghost. A television mounted near the waiting area flickered with breaking news coverage already spreading across Montana. Federal raid connected to secret Cold War facility. Military files expose decades of corruption, local developer detained. Images flashed across the screen. The Holloway farm, federal vehicles, Denton Pike in handcuffs. Then suddenly, Harold Holloway's photograph appeared. Young, serious, wearing military engineering insignia Wade had never seen before. The reporter spoke rapidly. "Sources now confirm Harold Holloway, previously believed to be a retired Montana farmer, worked on classified communications infrastructure projects during the Vietnam era." Wade leaned back slowly against the wall. His father's hidden life was becoming public. The old quiet farmer everybody ignored in Alder Ridge was suddenly national news. A woman sat beside Wade quietly sometime after dawn. Older, gray-haired, sharp eyes beneath exhaustion. "You look exactly like him." Wade turned slowly. "Evelyn Cross." The woman nodded once. "Harold used to say you had your mother's patience and his bad temper." Wade stared at her. "You knew him?" "For 40 years. Evelyn folded gloved hands carefully in her lap. "We were part of the same network after Black Ridge collapsed." "Why hide all this?" Her expression darkened slightly. "Because people died when they tried exposing it publicly." She looked toward the television. "Some still might." The news now showed archival photographs recovered from the bunker, military relay stations, government documents, land seizure records. Wade's life had become something enormous overnight, and he wanted none of it. Evelyn watched him quietly. "Harold worried about you more than anything else." Wade laughed softly once, tired. He had a strange way of showing it. "No." Evelyn shook her head gently. "He had the only way he knew." That silenced Wade completely. Because she was right. Harold Holloway built love the same way he built bunkers, quietly. carefully, without asking anyone to notice. The surgery doors finally opened 6 hours later. Wade stood instantly. The veterinarian stepped into the hallway, pulling off surgical gloves. Exhaustion lined her face. "He's alive." Wade closed his eyes briefly. Just 1 second. Relief nearly buckled his knees. "But—" The word returned immediately. The veterinarian sighed softly. "He lost a lot of blood. At his age—" She paused carefully. "The next 48 hours matter." Wade nodded slowly. "Can I see him?" A few minutes later, Wade entered the recovery room quietly. Ghost lay beneath warm blankets attached to monitors and IV lines. Part of his side had been shaved for surgery. His breathing sounded weak but steady beneath the soft machine noises surrounding him. The old shepherd opened his cloudy eyes the moment Wade stepped inside. Tail thump, weak, but there. Wade sat carefully beside the bed and rested one hand against Ghost's neck. "Hey, partner." Ghost exhaled softly. "You stubborn old fool." The dog closed his eyes again beneath Wade's hand. Safe now. For the first time in years, Wade felt something unfamiliar settle quietly through him. Peace. Not complete. Not permanent. But real. 3 days later, the story exploded nationally. The archive files from Black Ridge spread across every major news network in America. Illegal military surveillance programs, hidden Cold War operations buried beneath private land, corruption stretching through decades of government contracts and land acquisitions. Denton Pike's family name appeared everywhere. So did Harold Holloway's. The forgotten engineer who preserved the evidence for 50 years beneath a dead farm in Montana. Reporters flooded Alder Ridge. Satellite trucks lined the town streets. The little diner where locals once warned Wade the property was cursed now served coffee to national journalists. And suddenly, everyone remembered Harold differently. Not poor, not strange, brilliant, a patriot, a whistleblower. The town created stories overnight about the quiet man nobody truly knew. Wade hated every second of it. He stayed in the veterinary clinic beside Ghost almost constantly, while television screens replayed the same headlines over and over. Then one afternoon, Sharon appeared. She stood awkwardly in the clinic doorway, wearing an expensive winter coat, completely unsuited for mountain weather. Older now, smaller somehow. Wade looked at her quietly from Ghost's bedside. Neither spoke at first. The old shepherd lifted his head slightly when he saw her, then laid it back down again without interest. Sharon glanced toward the television, where Harold's photograph filled the screen once more. "I didn't know," she whispered. Wade said nothing. "I swear to God, Wade, I didn't know any of this." He believed her. That was the strange part. Sharon was selfish, cold sometimes, but not evil. Just tired of loving a man who disappeared emotionally after war and never fully returned. She looked toward Ghost. "He saved your life again?" "Yes." Tears filled her eyes suddenly. Not dramatic, not manipulative. Real. "I used to be jealous of that dog." Wade frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because no matter how far away you got," her voice cracked softly, "he could always reach you." Silence settled between them. Hospital machines hummed quietly beside Ghost's bed. Finally, Sharon looked toward Wade again. "They're calling your father a hero." "He was." She nodded slowly. "I think," she swallowed hard, "I think maybe I forgot you were one too." The words landed strangely. Not healing, not enough for that. But honest. And honesty mattered now. Wade looked down at Ghost sleeping beneath blankets. "Heavy things break eventually," he said quietly. "People too." Sharon wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry about the courthouse." Wade studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded once. Not forgiveness, not anger either. Just acceptance. Sharon left quietly after that. Wade never saw her again. A week later, he drove back to the Holloway farm. Snow still covered most of the mountains, though spring sunlight had begun cutting through the storms at last. The barn was gone completely, collapsed into blackened wreckage above the sealed bunker below. Federal teams still worked sections of the property collecting evidence and recovering underground archives, but the farmhouse remained standing, waiting. Ghost lay across the passenger seat during the drive home, thinner now, stitched along his ribs, but alive. The old shepherd watched the mountains through the truck window the entire way. When they finally reached the farm, Ghost slowly climbed out and stood in the cold wind beside Wade. The burned ruins smoked faintly against the snow. Helicopters no longer circled overhead. News crews were gone. Silence had returned to the mountains. Wade looked across the property his father protected for half a century, then down at Ghost beside him. "You ready to go home?" Ghost leaned gently against his leg, and together they walked back toward the farmhouse beneath the bitter-root sky. The mountain wind carried the smell of pine, melting snow, and burned timber across the Holloway property. Winter was finally loosening its grip. Patches of dark earth had begun appearing through the snowfields around the farmhouse, and water dripped steadily from the roof in the pale afternoon sunlight. For the first time since Wade arrived on the farm, the place no longer felt dead. Ghost moved slowly beside him across the yard. The old shepherd still limped from the gunshot wound. His muzzle had gone almost completely gray now, and age showed plainly in the stiffness of his movements. But he was alive. That alone felt like a miracle. Wade paused halfway to the porch and looked back toward the ruins of the barn. Federal crews had sealed the collapsed bunker entrances weeks earlier. Most of the underground system remained buried beneath tons of rock and concrete now. But the archives survived. Harold Holloway's evidence had reached the world, and the world had listened. Denton Pike eventually accepted a federal plea agreement rather than risk public trial. Sheriff Grady resigned before formal charges could even finish processing. Several former intelligence officials quietly disappeared from public life over the following months. Television networks called it one of the largest buried Cold War corruption scandals in American history. Wade stopped watching the news after the third week. He didn't care about headlines anymore. What mattered sat beside him in the snow. Ghost nudged his hand softly. "You hungry?" The shepherd's ears lifted immediately. Wade laughed quietly for the first time in years. A real laugh. Small, rusty, but real. Inside, the farmhouse felt warmer now, lived in. Wood crackled inside the old stove while afternoon sunlight stretched across the kitchen floorboards. Harold Holloway once walked for 50 years in silence. Wade had started restoring the place slowly over the winter. New windows, repaired fencing, fresh paint waiting in the shed for spring. Nothing fancy, just care. Ghost settled beside the fireplace while Wade cooked eggs and bacon in the old cast-iron pan his father used every morning of Wade's childhood. The familiar sounds filled the kitchen softly. Oil sizzling, coffee brewing, wind moving outside the windows. For a long time after Sharon left, silence used to terrify Wade. Now silence felt peaceful, because he finally understood the difference between being alone and being abandoned. One afternoon in early April, a truck pulled slowly into the driveway. Ghost barked once from the porch. Not alarm. Announcement. Wade stepped outside. A young man climbed from the truck carefully, maybe 26 years old, wearing a Marine Corps jacket and carrying too much exhaustion in his eyes for someone that young. He looked nervous standing there. "Mr. Holloway?" "Depends who's asking." The young man smiled faintly. "Tyler Brooks, Sergeant, retired." Retired. At 26. Wade understood immediately. Tyler glanced toward Ghost. "That him?" "Yep." The younger veteran crouched slowly near the shepherd. Ghost sniffed him once, then leaned quietly against Tyler's hand. Instant acceptance. Tyler swallowed hard suddenly. I saw your interview online. I didn't give an interview. No. The one after the helicopters. Somebody filmed it. Tyler hesitated. The way you talked to your dog. Wade looked away briefly toward the mountains. Tyler continued softly. My K9 died in Fallujah. His voice tightened. Haven't really been right since. Long silence followed. Wind moved softly through the pine trees surrounding the farm. Finally, Wade nodded toward the house. Coffee's inside. That was how it started. Not with plans, not with purpose. Just coffee. Then another veteran came 2 weeks later. Then another. Word spread quietly through military circles online about the old SEAL in Montana, with the wounded shepherd, and the mountain farm where nobody asked too many questions. Men arrived carrying invisible weight behind their eyes. Women arrived too. Former medics, Marines, Army Rangers, drone operators who couldn't sleep anymore. Some stayed one night, others stayed longer. Nobody paid anything. Wade put them to work instead, repairing fences, cutting wood, clearing old fields, working the land. Ghost supervised everything from the porch like an old retired sergeant major too stubborn to quit. The farm slowly came back to life around them. By May, the lower fields turned green again beneath the mountains. Vegetable gardens stretched behind the farmhouse. Horses grazed inside repaired fencing. Laughter occasionally drifted across the property in the evenings beside campfires and coffee. The dead farm Harold Holloway left behind had become something else entirely. A refuge. A place where broken people could breathe again. One morning, Wade found Tyler sitting alone near the burned remains of the barn, watching sunrise over the bitterroots. Couldn't sleep? Wade asked. Tyler shrugged. Bad dreams. Wade nodded like a man who understood completely. Ghost limped over and settled beside the younger veteran automatically. Tyler scratched behind the shepherd's ears quietly. You think it ever goes away? Wade looked toward the mountains, the same mountains his father watched while building hidden bunkers and carrying impossible secrets alone. No, Wade said honestly, but sometimes you stop carrying it by yourself. Tyler nodded slowly, and for the first time since arriving at the farm, the young man smiled. Summer arrived gently in the mountains. Wildflowers spread across the valleys surrounding the Holloway property. The repaired farmhouse porch filled with rocking chairs and muddy boots and old veterans drinking coffee before sunrise. Ghost grew stronger slowly. Not younger, never younger, but stronger. He still limped, still tired easily. But every evening he walked the property beside Wade while golden light rolled across the fields below the mountains. One evening in late August, a lawyer from Missoula arrived carrying a final sealed trust package recovered from the bunker archives. Wade opened it slowly at the kitchen table while Ghost rested beside the stove. Inside sat Harold Holloway's final legal documents: property deeds, trust transfers, and one handwritten letter. Wade recognized his father's writing instantly. Son, if you're reading this, then you finally found the truth underneath the mountain. I'm sorry for the years I stayed silent, but I needed the farm to survive longer than I did, and I needed somewhere the world couldn't follow you when it finally became too heavy. The property was transferred into your name in 1982, long before Sharon, long before Denton Pike, long before any of this. Nobody could ever legally take it from you. That was the point. A man abandoned by the world still deserves a place to come home to. Love, Dad. Wade sat silently for a very long time afterward. Ghost eventually limped over and rested his head against Wade's knee. Outside, summer wind moved gently through the fields Harold Holloway protected for half a century. Wade finally stood and walked to the fireplace. Above the mantel hung 2 framed photographs now. One of Harold Holloway standing beside a younger Wade near the river decades earlier. the other of Ghost, wearing his military service harness during deployment. Between them, inside a small wooden frame, sat the old $2 bill, the same bill Sharon used to humiliate him in court, the same bill Harold transformed into a key. The faded pencil numbers remained visible near the edge. Beneath the glass, Wade had placed Harold's handwritten sentence. A man abandoned by the world still deserves a place to come home to. Ghost settled beside the fireplace afterward with a tired sigh. The old shepherd closed his cloudy eyes slowly, peacefully. Outside, the Holloway farm stretched green and alive beneath the Bitterroot Mountains, while evening light rolled across the fields like gold moving through grass. The wind carried softly through the valley, and for the first time in a very long while, neither Wade nor Ghost felt lost anymore. They were finally home. If you believe a man deserves dignity no matter how broken life leaves him, type home down in the comments. And if you've ever had one loyal soul stand by you when the whole world walked away, give this video a like and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe if you enjoy stories about justice, second chances, loyal dogs, and the kind of quiet American strength that never really dies.